Hello everybody, I wanted to share with you a historical figure who I found out who wrote some things about 200 years ago that pretty much accurately portray what happened in the following 200 years from that. Now this guy lived in the 1700s and his name was Alexander Tytler. And what he said was that anytime you have a free society, a democracy, it will fall for the following reasons and it will go through this cycle. So this is the cycle, a simplified version of what he said we would go through, and I think it's fairly accurate. We had a revolution in 1776 against the British, followed by liberty. Eventually we all got complacent, which I think we can see today, and many people become dependent upon the government. Now currently, our civil rights have been taken, and we're following not at all what the founders intended for liberty. We are more likely, I would consider, under tyranny. I think we're getting to the point where we're going to have another revolution. Now, hopefully that will be a peaceful revolution. That's what I think can be accomplished if we're going to have liberty again. Otherwise, we'll just sink into tyranny forever. So that is a pretty interesting cycle, I thought, that he predicted that 200 years ago. And I'm going to read you a quick quote from him that I think even lays it out more accurately and leads me to some more conclusions. He says, quote, "A democracy is always temporary in nature. It simply cannot exist as a permanent form of government. A democracy will continue to exist up to the time that voters discover that they can vote themselves generous gifts from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for candidates who promise the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that every democracy will finally collapse due to loose fiscal policy, which is always followed by a dictatorship. The average of the world's greatest civilizations from the beginning of history has been about 200 years. And he goes on to describe the cycle that I just described to you. So looking back at that quote, we have had people voting themselves gifts from the treasury. Look at the amount of government dependence we have on food stamps and bailouts. And whoever gets in bed with the politicians gets the money. So they vote themselves into money and power. He also talks about loose fiscal policy, which I think we all know about. The Federal Reserve, the government inflates money. And it's always followed by a dictatorship or tyranny, which is pretty much what we're under now. 21% of the people only feel like they have the consent of the governed. Everyone else disagrees or doesn't know. 61% of people disagree if the government doesn't have consent. So I don't know what is more of a dictatorship or a tyranny than that. So we're headed for, eventually, hopefully, a revolution of thought in this country that we will no longer put up with this. And it should be a peaceful one. Now what he says is that it's impossible to have a democracy without eventually going through the cycle. But I was thinking, what could we do in the future, in future constitutions, that maybe would prevent this? And I think one of the things the founders left out that I've heard other people talk about is term limits, for one. And yes, I think that they could still get around that, but if we made some kind of law where the government was not allowed to vote people gifts from the treasury, that might help too, some sort of amendment or provision for that in the future. But, you know, this guy says it happens no matter what, and the founders did have a pretty good constitution laid out before them to make sure that tyranny didn't happen, and look what happened. So I think the government might always become corrupt when the people become dependent and compliant and apathetic, and they get fat, happy, and stupid, and then they no longer care about this stuff, and the powers that be do what they want with impunity regardless of the Constitution. So let me know what you think, if that's preventable. I'd like to see if anyone thinks that it's just hopeless, or if we can maybe have a peaceful revolution and then set up a government to last more than 200 years. I think that would be great. Thank you for watching.